The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Gunnison, Colorado, when Becky Wilson's life changed forever. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of her calico dress, watching with horrified disbelief as her brother Jeremiah haggled with a passing trader over her future as if she were nothing more than livestock. At 21, she had never imagined her own blood would betray her so completely. $200 for a healthy young woman like her is highway robbery, Jeremiah spat, his voice slurred from the whiskey he'd been drinking since dawn. Look at her. She can cook, clean, and ain't bad on the eyes neither. The trader, a portly man with yellowed teeth and breath that reeked of tobacco, leaned forward, squinting at Becky like she was a horse he was considering for purchase. $150 is my final offer. Times are hard, and I already got 3 girls I'm taking east. Becky's stomach churned with revulsion. 3 months after their parents had died of influenza, leaving the family homestead in debt, her brother had descended into gambling and drinking. Now, in the spring of 1878, he'd reached a new low. "Please, Jeremiah," she whispered, but he silenced her with a glare that promised violence if she spoke again. Neither man noticed the tall figure who had stopped his horse nearby, observing the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Got yourself quite a business there," came a deep voice, steady as stone. Both men turned to face the newcomer. Lucas Quaid sat atop a dappled gray stallion, trail dust coating his dark denim and the brim of his Stetson. His shoulders were broad beneath his weathered leather vest, and his face, though young, perhaps 26, carried the hardened look of a man who'd seen trouble and wasn't afraid of finding more. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," Jeremiah said, squaring his shoulders. Lucas dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling faintly against the packed dirt. "Selling your own kin, now that makes it everyone's concern." His right hand rested casually near the holstered Colt at his hip. The trader shuffled backward. "I don't want no trouble." "Then I suggest you mount up and find another town to conduct your business." Lucas's voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath the words. The trader hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Plenty other places to trade." He climbed onto his wagon and with a sharp snap of his reins was gone in a cloud of dust. Jeremiah's face contorted with fury. "You cost me money, stranger." "No," Lucas said, taking a deliberate step forward. "I stopped you from making the biggest mistake of your miserable life." He moved to stand between Becky and her brother. "Where I come from, family protects each other. They don't sell each other to the highest bidder. She's my sister. I can do what I want with her." Jeremiah's hand twitched toward the knife at his belt. In a flash of movement that Becky could barely follow, Lucas had drawn his pistol and had it trained on Jeremiah's chest. "I wouldn't if I were you." His voice was soft but carried across the now silent street. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation. "You gonna shoot me for handling my own family business?" Jeremiah challenged, though he kept his hands visible. "No," Lucas replied, "but I will escort this lady somewhere safe until you sober up enough to remember what family actually means." He turned slightly toward Becky, keeping his eyes on Jeremiah. "Madam, would you like to come with me?" Becky looked from her brother's red-faced anger to the steady gaze of this stranger who had intervened when no one else would. Her decision wasn't difficult. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I would." "This ain't over," Jeremiah snarled. "For today it is," Lucas replied, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. He offered his arm to Becky, who took it gratefully. "Sheriff Dawson might be interested to hear about your business ventures, though." As they walked away, Becky felt her brother's hateful gaze boring into her back. Her heart raced with fear, relief, and uncertainty. The life she had known was crumbling, But somehow, in this moment with a stranger's protective arm guiding her, she felt safer than she had in months. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think on that now," Lucas interrupted gently. "Let's get you somewhere you can rest. Mrs. Peterson runs a boarding house that's proper and clean." He glanced down at her, his expression softening slightly. "My name's Lucas Quaid." "Becky Wilson," she replied, noting the kindness in his blue eyes that contrasted with the hardened set of his jaw. "Miss Wilson." He nodded respectfully. "I promise you'll be safe now." As they made their way down the dusty street toward the boarding house, Becky couldn't help wondering what twist of fate had brought this man to Gunnison at exactly the right moment. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. She was grateful for her rescue. But what would happen when Lucas Quaid rode on, as men like him always did? Mrs. Peterson's boarding house stood at the end of Pine Street, its whitewashed exterior and neat green shutters a testament to the owner's fastidious nature. The widow Peterson herself answered the door, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that did little to soften her sharp features. However, when she saw Becky's tear-streaked face, her expression immediately softened. "My goodness, child, what's happened?" she asked, ushering them inside the cool foyer. Lucas explained the situation in brief, careful terms, omitting the most degrading details to spare Becky's dignity. Mrs. Peterson's face grew increasingly stern as she listened. "Jeremiah Wilson should be horsewhipped," she declared when Lucas finished. "Your parents would turn in their graves, God rest their souls." She turned to Becky. "You'll stay here, of course." "I have a room on the second floor that gets the morning light." "I don't have much money," Becky admitted, twisting her hands in her skirt. "Nonsense. We'll work something out. I could use help with the cooking and cleaning," Mrs. Peterson said with a wave of her hand. "Now come along, you look dead on your feet." As Mrs. Peterson led Becky toward the stairs, Lucas cleared his throat. "I'll speak with Sheriff Dawson about your brother's behavior, Miss Wilson. Would you like me to collect any of your belongings from your home?" Becky hesitated. Going back meant facing Jeremiah, but she had so little in this world. "There's a trunk under my bed with my mother's quilt and some clothes, and a small wooden box on the dresser. It has my mother's locket inside." Lucas nodded. "I'll see to it." "You be careful, Mr. Quaid," Mrs. Peterson warned. "That Jeremiah has always been trouble even before their parents passed." "I've handled worse, madam," Lucas replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he turned to leave, Becky called after him. "Mr. Quaid," he paused, looking back. "Why did you help me?" "You don't even know me." For a moment, something dark and pained crossed his features. "Let's just say I know what it's like when family lets you down." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Upstairs, in a small but clean room with faded floral wallpaper, Becky sat on the edge of the bed as Mrs. Peterson bustled about, pulling fresh linens from a chest and talking continuously about the scandalous nature of Jeremiah's actions. "Always thought that boy would come to no good," she muttered, plumping a pillow with more force than necessary. "Your mother, rest her soul, tried her best with him, but some souls just choose the dark path." Becky barely heard her. Her mind was caught between the horror of her brother's betrayal and the unexpected intervention of the cowboy. Lucas Quaid, with his steady gaze and quiet strength, had appeared like something out of a dime novel, yet there was nothing fictional about the way he'd stood between her and harm. "You're fortunate Mr. Quaid was passing through," Mrs. Peterson continued, as if reading her thoughts. "He's been in town about a week, staying at the hotel. Keeps to himself mostly, but I've heard he's looking to purchase land hereabouts." This caught Becky's attention. "He's planning to stay in Gunnison, so they say. Been meeting with old Mr. Henderson about his ranch north of town. Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look. Handsome man, isn't he? And a gentleman too, from what I can tell. Becky felt her cheeks warm. He was very kind to help me, indeed. Mrs. Peterson's expression grew serious. Now, don't you worry about a thing. You're safe here and we'll figure out the rest tomorrow. There's stew for supper at 6 if you're feeling up to coming down. Left alone, Becky moved to the window that overlooked the main street. From here, she could see the bustle of afternoon activity, merchants closing shops, cowboys heading to the saloon, women hurrying home with their day's purchases. Ordinary life continuing while hers had been appended. Her thoughts drifted to the homestead outside town where she'd grown up. After her parents died, it had ceased to feel like home, becoming instead a place of tension and fear as Jeremiah's behavior grew increasingly erratic. The idea of never returning should have frightened her, but instead, she felt only relief. And beneath that relief, a small, unexpected flutter of something else when she thought of Lucas Quaid, the man who had, in the span of 5 minutes, changed the course of her life. The sound of horses approaching drew her attention back to the street below. Lucas had returned, leading his gray stallion with one hand while the other guided a smaller bay mare that carried her trunk strapped behind the saddle. He dismounted in front of the boarding house, and Becky stepped back from the window, not wanting to be caught watching him. Minutes later, Mrs. Peterson knocked on her door. "Mr. Quaid has returned with your things, dear." Becky opened the door to find Lucas standing in the hallway, her trunk at his feet and the wooden box in his hands. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek and his knuckles were scraped, but his expression remained impassive. "Your brother wasn't pleased to see me," he said simply, handing her the box. "But he saw reason once the sheriff accompanied me back to collect your belongings." "He didn't hurt you, did he?" Becky asked, noticing the way he flexed his right hand. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nothing worth mentioning." He gestured to the trunk. "Everything should be there. I made sure of it." "Thank you," she said, opening the box to find her mother's silver locket nestled safely inside. "This means more to me than I can say." Lucas nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Sheriff Dawson had a long talk with your brother. Made it clear that selling people isn't tolerated in Gunnison, family or otherwise. He'll be keeping an eye on him." "That won't stop Jeremiah when he's drinking," Becky said softly. "No, but it might make him think twice." Lucas hesitated, then added, "I'll be staying in town for some time. If he bothers you, you send word to me at Henderson's ranch. I'll be taking over operations there starting next week." The news surprised her. "You're buying Mr. Henderson's place." "Been saving for years to get my own spread," he confirmed. "Henderson's getting too old to manage it alone and his children have all moved east. It's good land with a solid herd." Mrs. Peterson, who had been pretending not to listen while straightening a painting in the hallway, interjected, "You must join us for supper, Mr. Quaid." "It's the least we can do after your heroics today." Lucas looked uncomfortable with the invitation. "That's kind, madam, but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," the older woman insisted. "Becky needs friendly faces around her after what she's been through, and I always make too much stew anyway." He glanced at Becky, who found herself nodding. "Please stay," she said. "I'd like to thank you properly." Something in her voice must have convinced him, for he gave a short nod. "I'll just see to my horse and return at 6, if that's suitable." After he left, Mrs. Peterson helped Becky unpack her meager belongings. The older woman clucked sympathetically at the worn state of Becky's dresses. "We'll need to get you some new things. Can't have you starting your new life looking like you've been put through the ringer." "I can't afford new clothes," Becky protested. "Consider it an advance on your wages. You'll be helping me with the boarders and I pay fair," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "Now, let's see what we can do with your hair before supper. First impressions matter, especially with a man like Mr. Quaid." Becky wanted to argue that she wasn't trying to impress Lucas, but the words died on her lips. There was something about the quiet cowboy that intrigued her, beyond her gratitude for his intervention. A depth in his eyes that spoke of his own struggles and triumphs. By 6 o'clock, Becky had washed away the dust of the day and changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Peterson had helped her arrange her honey blonde hair in a style that softened her features, and loaned her a drop of lavender water to dab behind her ears. Lucas arrived precisely at 6, hat in hand, his dark hair still damp from what must have been a hasty wash. He'd changed into a clean shirt, and though it was as worn as the previous one, it emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. Mrs. Peterson's dining room was a cozy space dominated by a large oak table that could seat 8. Tonight, only 3 places were set, with a tureen of fragrant beef stew steaming in the center and a loaf of fresh bread beside it. "Sit, sit," the older woman urged, gesturing Lucas to a chair across from Becky. "No formality required here. Throughout the meal, Mrs. Peterson kept the conversation flowing, tactfully avoiding any mention of the day's events, and instead focusing on town news and Lucas's plans for the Henderson Ranch. Becky found herself studying him as he spoke, noting the way his serious expression transformed when he discussed his hopes for breeding stronger cattle and improving the ranch's irrigation. "Been working other men's land since I was 16, he explained, breaking a piece of bread. "First as a hand, then as a foreman. Saved every penny I could." "That's quite an accomplishment for a man your age," Mrs. Peterson remarked. "Most young men would have gambled away their earnings or spent it on whiskey and women." She shot a meaningful glance at Becky, who felt her cheeks warm. "I had my goal," Lucas said simply. "Didn't leave room for distractions." "And family," the older woman pressed. "Any folks waiting for you to succeed?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, madam, lost my parents young. Raised by an uncle who made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. Left as soon as I could fend for myself." His words hung in the air, and Becky felt a surge of understanding. This explained his reaction to her brother's behavior. He knew firsthand what it meant to be betrayed by family. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Lucas looked up, meeting her gaze directly for the first time that evening. "It was a long time ago, made me who I am." "A fine young man," Mrs. Peterson declared, rising to clear the plates. "Now I've got apple pie for dessert, and you're both having a slice whether you want it or not." As she bustled into the kitchen, a brief silence fell between Becky and Lucas. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "After everything today," Becky considered the question. "Strange, relieved, scared, angry all at once." "I know I should be devastated about Jeremiah, but truthfully he stopped being the brother I knew months ago." Lucas nodded. "Grief affects people differently. Some rise above it, others sink beneath it." "Is that what happened with your uncle?" she asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's not my place to ask." "It's all right," he said. "My uncle was a hard man before my parents died. Their passing just gave him an excuse to be cruel openly rather than behind closed doors." "Yet you turned out differently," Becky observed. A faint smile touched his lips. "I decided early on I wanted to be the opposite of him in every way that mattered." Mrs. Peterson returned with the pie, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. By the time the meal concluded, Becky found herself laughing at Lucas's dry observations about some of the more colorful characters he'd encountered in his travels. The terrible events of the day seemed to recede, Not forgotten but temporarily set aside. As Lucas prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I'll be in town for another few days before moving out to the ranch. Would you permit me to call on you tomorrow, Miss Wilson? Perhaps show you some of the safer parts of Gunnison that you might not have had occasion to visit." The invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to impose on your time, Mr. Quaid." "You wouldn't be," he assured her. "Besides, it might be good for the town to see you out and about, head held high. Shows you're not hiding. Mrs. Peterson, who had been pretending to adjust a vase of flowers nearby, added, "That's an excellent idea. Fresh air would do you good, Becky." Becky hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd like that, thank you. I'll come by after lunch then." He set his hat on his head. "Good night, ladies." After he left, Mrs. Peterson turned to Becky with a knowing smile. "That man didn't just happen to be passing by when your brother was causing trouble. Things like that don't just happen." "What do you mean?" Becky asked. "I mean, child, that some things are meant to be." The older woman patted her hand. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's a new beginning." That night, as Becky lay in the unfamiliar bed, she thought about Lucas Quaid, a man who had seemingly appeared from nowhere to change her fate. Sleep came easier than she expected, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of her parents' deaths or her brother's angry face. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the curtains, and the sounds of Gunnison awakening. Becky rose early to help Mrs. Peterson with breakfast for the other boarders, an elderly schoolteacher, and a young banker who took their meals in near silence. Though both expressed their sympathy when Mrs. Peterson briefly explained Becky's situation. After the breakfast dishes were cleared, Becky helped with the laundry, finding comfort in the familiar routine of wringing and hanging sheets. The physical labor kept her mind occupied, preventing her from dwelling too much on what her future might hold. "You're a good worker, Mrs. Peterson commented as they pinned the last sheet to the line. "My arthritis makes these tasks harder each year. I'm glad to have your help." "I'm happy to earn my keep," Becky replied sincerely. "There's more to life than just working, girl," the older woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Speaking of which, you'd better wash up. Mr. Quaid will be here soon, and you're covered in soap suds." Becky hurried to her room, where she changed into a simple green dress, one of her few that wasn't patched or faded beyond repair. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it back with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror seemed different, somehow still bearing traces of yesterday's shock, but with a new determination in her eyes. Lucas arrived promptly after lunch, looking somewhat out of place in the boarding house's prim parlor. He stood when Becky entered, his hat in his hands. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, "you look well today." "Thank you, Mr. Quaid, and please call me Becky." A slight smile touched his lips. "Then I'm Lucas." Mrs. Peterson appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. "Don't keep the girl out too late, Mr. Quaid, and mind you stay on the respectable streets." "Yes, madam," he replied with such solemn deference that Becky had to suppress a smile. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed Gunnison in golden light. Lucas offered Becky his arm, which she took after only a moment's hesitation. They made an unusual pair as they walked down Main Street, he with his tall, rangy build and weathered clothing, she small and neat in her simple dress. "I thought we might visit the Mercantile," Lucas suggested. "The owner, Mr. Bennett, keeps books for lending in the back. Then perhaps the park by the church, if you're agreeable." "That sounds lovely," Becky replied, though her attention was caught by the stares and whispers from townspeople they passed. "Everyone's looking at us." "News travels fast in small towns," Lucas said, his voice low. "But let them look. You've done nothing wrong." His steadfast support bolstered her courage. By the time they reached Bennett's Mercantile, Becky had managed to straighten her shoulders and meet the curious gazes directly. Mr. Bennet, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Wilson, Mr. Quaid, what can I help you with today? I hear you have books for lending," Lucas said. Miss Wilson is an avid reader. This wasn't strictly true. Becky had enjoyed reading the few books her family owned, but she'd never described herself as avid. Still, she appreciated Lucas's attempt to present her as a woman of refinement. "Indeed I do," Bennet replied, leading them to a small shelf at the rear of the store. "Nothing like what you'd find back east, of course, but I keep a decent selection." As Becky browsed the titles, she became aware of two women whispering nearby, their eyes darting between her and Lucas. Their conversation wasn't quite quiet enough to escape her hearing. Heard Jeremiah Wilson tried to sell her to that trader from Denver. Lucky that Cowboy was there. Staying at Widow Peterson's now. Lucas must have heard them too, for he moved slightly closer to Becky, his presence protective without being possessive. "See anything that interests you?" he asked, deliberately loud enough for the gossiping women to hear. Becky selected a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "This one, please. It was my mother's favorite, but our copy was lost in a leak during the spring rains." Mr. Bennet smiled. "An excellent choice, Miss Wilson. You can keep it for 2 weeks." As they turned to leave, Lucas paused at the counter. "Mr. Bennet, I understand you'll be receiving a shipment of materials for the Henderson Ranch next week. I'll be the one collecting them from now on." Bennett's eyebrows rose. "So the rumors are true? You've purchased old Henderson's place?" "The papers will be final tomorrow," Lucas confirmed. This exchange, Becky realized, was for the benefit of the gossips as much as for practical purposes. Lucas was establishing himself as a property owner, a man of substance, not just a drifting cowboy who had intervened in a street dispute. Outside, Becky gave him a grateful smile. "That was kind of you," Lucas shrugged. "People will talk regardless. Might as well give them something worthwhile to discuss." They walked toward the small park near the church, where benches had been placed beneath shady cottonwoods. The afternoon was pleasantly warm, and several families were enjoying the fine weather. A few curious glances came their way, but the presence of children playing nearby lent a propriety to their meeting that deflected the worst of the scrutiny. As they sat, Becky asked, "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" Lucas gazed across the park, his expression thoughtful. "Since I was about 12. Worked a cattle drive that summer, just helping with odd jobs. There was a foreman man named Davis who treated me decent, showed me how a good outfit should run. He owned a small spread in Texas. Nothing fancy, but it was his. I decided then that's what I wanted." "And now you'll have it," Becky said. "The Henderson Ranch is one of the finest in the valley." "It needs work," Lucas admitted. "Henderson's getting on in years and some things have been neglected, but the bones are good. Good water, good grazing land." His passion for the land was evident in his voice, and Becky found herself drawn to this side of him, the builder, the planner, looking toward the future with quiet determination. "What about you?" he asked. "What would you have chosen for yourself if circumstances were different?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a very long time. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "After Mother and Father died, it was just about surviving each day." Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes, and before, Becky considered. "I always enjoyed teaching the younger children at Sunday school. Perhaps I might have trained to be a teacher." "It's not too late for that," Lucas pointed out. "Gunnison's growing. They'll need teachers." The idea took root in Becky's mind, a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider. "Perhaps you're right." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the children play. One little girl in particular caught Becky's attention, perhaps 4 years old, with dark braids and a determined expression as she constructed an elaborate arrangement of sticks and leaves. "She reminds me of you," Lucas said unexpectedly. "Me? How so?" His lips curved in a slight smile. "The way she frowns when she's concentrating. You do the same thing." Becky touched her forehead self-consciously. "I didn't realize I was frowning." "It's not a criticism," he assured her. "It shows you're thinking, considering things carefully. That's rare." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. As the afternoon began to fade toward evening, they walked back toward the boarding house at a leisurely pace. Lucas maintained a respectful distance between them. Yet Becky was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of leather and soap, the steady rhythm of his footsteps beside her. Near the boarding house, they encountered Sheriff Dawson, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper mustache who nodded in greeting. "Miss Wilson, Mr. Quaid, fine evening." "Sheriff," Lucas acknowledged. "Any trouble?" The question was casual, but Becky knew he was asking about Jeremiah. "Your brother left town this morning," Dawson told Becky. "Said he was heading to Denver to find work. Seemed sober enough when he went." Relief washed over Becky, followed immediately by a strange sadness. Despite everything, Jeremiah was still her brother, the last of her family. His departure severed another tie to her past. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff," she said quietly. Lucas studied her face. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "It's for the best." At the boarding house door, Lucas removed his hat. "I'll be busy with the ranch purchase tomorrow, but would you allow me to call on you again the day after? Perhaps for Sunday service." The request was significant. Appearing together at church would make a public statement about his intentions toward her, however preliminary. Becky felt a flutter of nervousness mingled with pleasure. "I'd like that very much," she replied. His smile then was warmer than any she'd seen from him before. "Until Sunday, then." As she watched him walk away, Mrs. Peterson opened the door behind her. "Well," the older woman prompted. "He's asked to escort me to church on Sunday," Becky said, still watching Lucas's retreating figure. "I knew he would," Mrs. Peterson said with satisfaction. "That man may not say much, but his eyes speak volumes when he looks at you." Becky turned to her, surprised. "Surely not." "We barely know each other." Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what it wants before the head has time to think about it. Now come inside and tell me everything about your afternoon." Over the next day, Becky settled into a routine at the boarding house, helping with meals and cleaning while trying to ignore the occasional curious visitor who invented transparent excuses to call on Mrs. Peterson. Word of her brother's attempted sale had spread throughout Gunnison, along with embellished accounts of Lucas's intervention. By Saturday evening, Becky was both eager for and nervous about Lucas's escort to church the following day. Mrs. Peterson had helped her mend and press her best Sunday dress, and even contributed a pretty lace collar that wasn't doing anyone any good sitting in a drawer. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Becky was ready well before the appointed time, sitting primly in the parlor while Mrs. Peterson fussed with the arrangement of flowers on the side table. "Stop fidgeting, child," the older woman admonished. "He'll be here." "I'm not worried that he won't come," Becky protested, though in truth, a small part of her did fear that Lucas might have reconsidered his interest in her. The knock, when it came, was firm and confident. Mrs. Peterson hurried to answer it, returning a moment later with Lucas, who was dressed in what was clearly his best, a dark suit that, while not new, was well cared for, and a crisp white shirt with a string tie. He stopped when he saw Becky, his expression softening. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, feeling her cheeks warm at his direct gaze. "So do you. I mean handsome, not lovely." The corner of his mouth twitched in amusement. "I appreciate the clarification, Mrs. Peterson shooed them toward the door. "Go on now, you'll be late. And Mr. Quaid, I expect you'll join us for Sunday dinner after service." "I'd be honored, madam." The walk to church was short but significant. Several townspeople nodded in greeting, their curious gazes taking in Lucas's protective stance at Becky's side. By the time they reached the white-steepled church, Becky knew their appearance together would be the primary topic of conversation after the service. Inside, they found seats toward the back. As the congregation rose for the first hymn, Lucas's deep voice joined the others, surprising Becky with its rich tone. Throughout the sermon, a lengthy discourse on forgiveness and new beginnings that seemed almost tailored to her situation, she was aware of his steady presence beside her, his arm occasionally brushing against hers when he shifted position. After the final prayer, they made their way outside, where many of the congregation lingered to socialize. Lucas stayed close as several people approached to greet them. Mrs. Turner, the baker's wife, was the first to speak. "Miss Wilson, we were all so sorry to hear about your troubles. If you need anything at all, you just let us know." "That's very kind, thank you," Becky replied, touched by the genuine concern in the woman's eyes. Mr. Henderson, a weathered man in his 70s who walked with the aid of a cane, approached next. "Quaid," he said with a nod. "Heard the papers are signed. You're official now." "Yes, sir," Lucas confirmed. "I'll be moving out to the ranch tomorrow." The old rancher turned his attention to Becky. "You picked yourself a good man here, Miss Wilson. Straight shooter, knows cattle, and isn't afraid of hard work." Becky felt herself blush. "We're just friends, Mr. Henderson." The old man's eyes twinkled. "If you say so." He turned back to Lucas. "You coming by for those ledgers this afternoon?" "Yes, sir, right after dinner." As they walked back to the boarding house, Becky said, "Everyone seems to have decided we're courting." Lucas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Would that be so terrible? The directness of his question took her breath away. "No," she admitted, "not terrible at all." A smile touched his lips. "Good." Sunday dinner at Mrs. Peterson's was a more elaborate affair than the daily meals, with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh baked rolls. The conversation flowed easily, with Lucas sharing his plans for improvements to the Henderson ranch and Mrs. Peterson providing gossip about various townspeople. "The Henderson place has good bones, like I said," Lucas explained as he helped himself to more potatoes. "But the fences on the north side need replacing, and the barn roof won't last another winter." "You'll need help," Mrs. Peterson observed. "One man can't manage all that alone. I've hired 2 hands who worked for Henderson before. Good men, both of them, and I'll bring on more for the busy seasons." Becky listened, fascinated by the practical details of ranch life. "It sounds like a massive undertaking." Lucas nodded. "It is. But worth it." He glanced at her. "Perhaps you might ride out to see it sometime when I've got things more settled." The invitation hung in the air, laden with meaning. A proper young woman didn't visit a bachelor's home without chaperonage or serious intentions involved. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "I'm sure I could accompany Becky on such a visit when the time is right." "I'd appreciate that, madam," Lucas said, his eyes still on Becky after dinner. As Lucas prepared to leave for his meeting with Henderson, he paused at the door. "I'll be moving out to the ranch tomorrow, but I'll be coming into town for supplies regularly. Would it be all right if I called on you when I do?" "I'd like that," Becky replied. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it briefly between both of his. "Thank you for today. It was the finest Sunday I've had in a long while." The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. "For me as well." After he left, Mrs. Peterson sighed dramatically. "That man is smitten, Becky, And unless I'm very much mistaken, the feeling is mutual. Becky couldn't deny it. In the short time she'd known Lucas Quaid, he had shown her more kindness and respect than any man she'd ever met. His quiet strength appealed to her, as did his determination to build something lasting. "It's too soon," she protested weakly. "We hardly know each other." "Sometimes it happens that way," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "My Henry proposed after knowing me just 2 weeks. We had 40 good years together before he passed. When it's right, it's right." The following weeks established a pattern. Lucas would come to town every few days for supplies, always finding time to call at the boarding house. Sometimes they would walk together, other times simply sit in the parlor and talk. Mrs. Peterson maintained a proper presence while giving them enough privacy for conversation to flow naturally. Becky learned about Lucas's years as a ranch hand in Texas, his time driving cattle northward, and his careful saving of every penny toward his dream of land ownership. In turn, she shared memories of her parents, her love of teaching the younger children at Sunday school, and her growing comfort with her new life in Gunnison. One bright afternoon in early June, Lucas arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The wildflowers are blooming in the North Meadow," he said. "I thought perhaps you and Mrs. Peterson might like to come out to the ranch for a picnic on Sunday after church. I've fixed up the house some, and I'd value your opinions." The invitation was extended casually, but Becky understood its significance. After a month of careful courtship within the confines of town, this represented a new step forward. Mrs. Peterson immediately agreed. "That sounds delightful. I haven't been out to the the Quaid Ranch in years." Sunday arrived with perfect weather, sunshine, and a gentle breeze that kept the heat at bay. After church, Lucas drove them to the ranch in a wagon, pointing out landmarks along the way. The road followed the river for several miles before turning north toward the foothills, where the Henderson Ranch occupied a verdant valley surrounded by aspens and pines. As they crested the final rise, the ranch came into view, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all set against the backdrop of mountains. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark dots against the green meadows. "It's beautiful," Becky breathed. Lucas's expression was proud as he guided the wagon toward the house. "It's coming along. Still plenty to do, but it's starting to feel like home." The house, when they entered, showed signs of recent work. The floors had been scrubbed, new curtains hung at the windows, and the furniture, solid pieces that had come with the property, had been arranged to create a comfortable living space. A vase of wildflowers sat on the kitchen table, their bright colors a cheerful welcome. "Did you do all this yourself?" Becky asked, noting the freshly painted walls. Lucas shook his head. "Mrs. Ramirez from town comes out twice a week to help with the house. She brought the curtains and flowers, said no home was complete without them." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly as she inspected the kitchen. "She's done a fine job. A house needs a woman's touch." The pointed comment wasn't lost on either Becky or Lucas, but they both pretended not to notice. After showing them the house, Lucas led them to the North Meadow for their picnic. Spread beneath the shade of a massive oak tree, on a blanket Mrs. Ramirez had provided, they enjoyed cold chicken, biscuits, and apple pie while gazing out over the ranch lands. "I can see why you fell in love with this place," Becky said, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "It feels peaceful." "It is," Lucas agreed. "Even when the work is hard, there's a satisfaction to it that I never found anywhere else." Mrs. Peterson, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly announced, "I think I'll walk down to that little stream and cool my feet. This heat isn't kind to my old bones." Before either could protest, She had gathered her skirts and was making her way down the gentle slope toward the water, leaving Becky and Lucas alone beneath the oak. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of leaves overhead. "Becky," Lucas finally said, his voice unusually hesitant, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes," he shifted to face her more directly. "I know we haven't known each other long by some people's reckoning, but I feel like I've known you much longer in the ways that matter." "I feel the same," she admitted softly. His eyes, so often guarded, were open and vulnerable now. "When I saw your brother trying to sell you that day, something in me just snapped. Not just because it was wrong, though it surely was, but because the thought of you being taken away before I'd even had a chance to know you felt like losing something precious before I'd even found it." Becky's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas, let me finish while I have the courage," he said with a small smile. "These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, it's only confirmed what I think I knew from the first moment. You're the woman I want to build a life with, Becky Wilson." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's. It's not fancy, but it meant the world to her." Opening it revealed a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "I'm asking if you do me the honor of becoming my wife." Tears welled in Becky's eyes. The proposal was unexpected, yet somehow not surprising at all, as if they had been moving toward this moment from their very first meeting. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "My family, my brother." "I'm not marrying your family," Lucas said firmly. "I'm asking to marry you, the woman who's shown more courage and grace in adversity than anyone I've ever known." Becky looked from the ring to Lucas's face, seeing there all the sincerity and hope that matched her own feelings. The answer came easily then, rising from her heart without hesitation. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Lucas Quaid." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. When he leaned forward to kiss her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed beneath the spreading branches of the old oak tree. Mrs. Peterson's delighted exclamation from the bottom of the hill suggested she hadn't wandered as far as she'd pretended. "Did she say yes?" she called up to them. Lucas laughed, the sound freer and happier than Becky had ever heard from him. "She did." "Well, it's about time," the older woman declared, making her way back up the slope with surprising speed for someone who had claimed heat fatigue moments earlier. "Now we have a wedding to plan." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Lucas and Becky agreed on a simple ceremony in August, giving them time to prepare the ranch and for Becky to sew a proper wedding dress with Mrs. Peterson's help. The news spread quickly through Gunnison, met with general approval and offers of assistance from townsfolk who had watched their courtship with interest. Lucas rode into town more frequently, often staying for supper at the boarding house and lingering afterward for private conversations with his fiancée under Mrs. Peterson's indulgent supervision. Each visit revealed more of the man beneath the quiet exterior: his dry humor, his thoughtful nature, his unwavering commitment to building a good life. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk, Becky asked the question that had lingered in her mind. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been passing by that day? If you hadn't stopped when you saw Jeremiah with that trader?" Lucas was silent for a long moment, his hand warm around hers. "I believe some things are meant to be," he finally said. "I wasn't just passing by, Becky. I'd seen you before at church in town. I'd noticed you but hadn't found the right way to introduce myself." His expression darkened. "When I saw what was happening, it gave me the excuse I needed to speak to you, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." The revelation surprised her. "You'd noticed me before," he nodded. "How could I not? You always carried yourself with such dignity, even after your parents passed. Always had a kind word for the children at church." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I was working up the courage to properly introduce myself when fate stepped in." "I'm glad it did," Becky said softly, "though I wish it hadn't involved Jeremiah's betrayal." "Sometimes good things can come from bad beginnings," Lucas replied, "like flowers growing after a wildfire." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The small church in Gunnison was filled with townspeople and ranchers from the surrounding area, all gathered to witness the union of Lucas Quaid and Becky Wilson. Mrs. Peterson had taken charge of decorations, filling the simple space with wildflowers and ribbons. In a small room at the back of the church, Becky stood in her wedding dress, a creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, made from fabric ordered specially from Denver. Mrs. Peterson fussed with her veil, tears already glistening in the older woman's eyes. "Your parents would be so proud," she said, adjusting a stray curl. "You look beautiful, my dear." "Thank you," Becky said, her own eyes threatening tears, "for everything. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't taken me in that day." "Nonsense, Mrs. Peterson said briskly, though her voice was thick with emotion. "You would have managed. You're stronger than you know." She stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There. Perfect. Now, are you ready to marry that fine man waiting for you?" Becky nodded, her heart too full for words. As the first notes of the organ filled the church, she took a deep breath and prepared to walk toward her future. The ceremony was brief but moving. Lucas, standing tall and handsome in a new suit, watched Becky approach with an expression of such tender amazement that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were gentle. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Lucas cupped Becky's face in his hands as if she were made of precious glass, and kissed her with a reverence that brought fresh tears to her eyes. The congregation erupted in applause, and Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and laughter, good food and better company. Lucas rarely left Becky's side, his hand finding hers whenever they weren't actively engaged with guests. As the party began to wind down, he leaned close to whisper, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Quaid?" The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she whispered back. "I'm ready." They slipped away amid cheers and well wishes, departing in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by the younger townspeople. The journey to the ranch was filled with a new kind of anticipation, the knowledge that they were truly beginning their life together. Lucas had been busy in the weeks leading up to the wedding, and the house showed it. Fresh paint gleamed in the moonlight, new curtains framed the windows, and the bedroom, when he carried her across the threshold to it, had been furnished with a new bed and dresser. "It's perfect," Becky said, taking in the cozy space that would be theirs. Lucas set her down gently but kept his arms around her. "It is now," he said softly, "because you're here." The months that followed were a time of growth and learning. Becky adapted to ranch life with determination, mastering the art of cooking on a temperamental wood stove and learning the rhythms of the seasons. Lucas proved to be a patient teacher and a devoted husband, his quiet strength a constant Becky came to rely on. By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving. Lucas's careful management and hard work had increased the herd and improved the land. The house had become a true home, filled with touches that reflected both their tastes: Lucas's practical furniture alongside Becky's handmade quilts and curtains. On a golden afternoon in September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and orange, Becky took Lucas's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said, her eyes shining. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by a joy so pure it transformed his features. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We'll welcome our child in the spring." Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her with infinite tenderness. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For this, for everything." As twilight deepened around them, Becky thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that terrible moment on a dusty street to this perfect one on their own land, with a future stretching bright before them. Her brother's cruel attempt to sell her had led, through Lucas's intervention, to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, noting her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones," she replied. "If Jeremiah hadn't tried to sell me that day, I would have found another way to meet you," Lucas said firmly. "Some things are just meant to be." As the first stars appeared overhead, Becky leaned against her husband's shoulder, his arm warm and secure around her. Their child would be born into a home filled with love, the kind of home she had once feared lost forever. The kind of home Lucas had dreamed of building all those years he worked other men's land. "I love you, Lucas Quaid," she whispered. His answer was in the gentle kiss he pressed to her forehead, in the protective hand that rested on her stomach, and in the quiet words that followed. "And I love you, Becky Quaid, now and always." Together they watched night claim the valley, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, their love born in an act of courage on a dusty street in Gunnison, and destined to grow stronger with each passing day. In the years that followed, the Quaid Ranch became known throughout Colorado Territory as one of the most prosperous and welcoming homesteads in the region. Their son, James, was born the following spring, a healthy boy with Lucas's dark hair and Becky's bright eyes. 2 years later, they welcomed twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, completing their family. Becky never saw her brother Jeremiah again, though occasionally news would reach Gunnison of a man matching his description, sometimes in Denver, sometimes farther west. She sent letters to the last known addresses, offering forgiveness and news of her happiness, but never received replies. In time, she came to accept that some wounds could not be healed, but they need not define the rest of her life. Lucas expanded the ranch gradually, always careful not to take on more than they could manage. His reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, bringing prosperity that allowed them to build a larger home as their family grew. Through it all, he remained the same steadfast man who had stepped forward that day in Gunnison, quiet, determined, and unfailingly devoted to the woman who had captured his heart. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Lucas and Becky would often sit together on their porch, watching the stars appear over their land, their hands intertwined as they savored the life they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings.